Good evening, gentlemen. We want to start looking at Notes on Structured Programming by this great man here, Dijkstra. This book is not very long. It's, as he calls it, a monograph. And part of the reason why I think it's so important is this book is associated with the term structured programming. But like many things in this world, if you actually find out what people say versus what, but part of the reason why in the Renaissance there was this idea called ad fontes, which means going back to the sources, meaning that when you really want to understand a field, you have to find the primary sources and read those primary sources yourself. You do not want to read what someone in between you and the great author said. And the reason for this is the great author is the historical point that matters. Everyone in between may have misinterpreted what the great author said. And indeed, not even that the great author may have fully digested all his insights, but if you really want to understand the truth, if you really want to get deep into any subject, you need to go back to the source. If you Google structured programming, or you think about if you've had a comp-sci education, what structured programming is said to be, you'll read things like elimination of the go-to statement and a programming paradigm characterized by source code that uses block-based source code structure to encode control flow and so forth. And while there's some truth to this, I think to reduce what Dijkstra did in this book to something so superficial it does such a grand disservice to students. And I'm convinced the reason it happens is that most of the people teaching computer science have not bothered to read Dijkstra. They've not bothered to read Hoare. They've not bothered to actually understand what was meant by these terms. And this is what we'll get by studying this book. So let's just look at the front matter here. So Notes on Structured Programming by Dijkstra. This is second edition. It says 1970. The original edition, I can't remember when, but I presume from here it was 1969. And let's look at some of the contents because it gives you some insight into it. So, to my reader, and on our inability to do much, on the reliability of mechanisms, on our mental aids, and so forth. You can already see just from the content here on understanding programs, on comparing programs, on the validity of proofs versus the validity of implementation. The Dijkstra is interested in things that are far more profound than superficial coding principles like solid principles and so forth. And the same thing may be said here. I've never really studied solid principles in a formal context, nor have I read what Barbara Liskov and the rest wrote about them. So you may find that when you actually go and study the material, that there's something more profound than what people talk about. But the point remains that if you take a buzzword like structured programming and you haven't really read the source material, you have no idea what the inventor or the originator of the term meant. Let's read the preface here to my reader. Dijkstra says, "These notes have the status of letters written to myself. I wrote them down because without doing so, I found myself repeating the same arguments over and over again. When reading what I had written, I was not always too satisfied. For one thing, I felt that they suffered from a marked verbosity, yet I do not try to condense them now, firstly because that would introduce another delay and I would like to think on. Secondly, because early experiences have made me afraid of being misunderstood. Many a programmer tends to see his sometimes rather specific difficulties as the core of the subject, and as a result, there are widely divergent opinions as to what programming is really about." And so in that, you kind of get a sense of what is Dijkstra writing about here. This book is about what programming is really about. For another thing, Dijkstra continues, as a document, this is very incomplete. I am only too aware of the fact that it ends in midair. Yet I have decided to have these notes duplicated besides some practical considerations mainly to show what I have thought to those who expressed interest in it or to those whose comments I would welcome. I hope that, despite its defects, you will enjoy at least parts of it. If these notes prove to be a source of inspiration or to give you a new appreciation of the programmer's trade, some of my goals will have been reached. So begins Dijkstra. And now just to give you a bit of, sort of to tease who the man is, because I said earlier on that people talk about structured programming in a very superficial way, and I'd like to say the same thing about Dijkstra. When people hear about Dijkstra, they think Dijkstra is the shortest path algorithm guy. Dijkstra was there's a shortest path problem, yes, but more significantly, Dijkstra developed the first compiler for Algol 60. And Algol 60 is very important in the history of programming languages because it's one of the main inspirations for C. So Algol 60 was defined in this conference by all these great men like Bacchus and the rest, but no one had managed to implement it. So Dijkstra is the first person who manages to implement the programming, a compiler for Algol 60. Number 2, he built one of the first, what we could call precursors to modern operating systems. So he did a lot of research in operating systems early on, in which he identified many problems. Some of the problems Dijkstra identified. Deadlock. If you've ever heard the term deadlock, which he called deadly embrace. The problem of the dining philosophers, for example, that's an invention of Dijkstra and embellished also together with Tony Hoare. The whole idea of memory locks, or what he called them semaphores, that's an invention of Dijkstra. And now, on top of that, Dijkstra explained, I think, to my understanding, and as far as I can tell, better than anyone else, what makes programming hard and how you have to approach the task of programming to be effective with it. So we are dealing with, I would say, a mountain of a man, a great genius. And here we are in this world, and one can't help but feel grateful when approaching primary sources that we get to learn at Dijkstra's feet. So join me on this. Next time we'll look at our inability to do much.